have been made since the very beginning of cinema. With the earliest examples of these films, most of these movies were adapted from popular novels like Little Women, Anne of Green Gables, and The Adventure of Tom Sawyer. Categorized within the subset of teen movies, coming-of-age stories usually focus on the growth of the protagonist from childhood to adulthood. A lot of the time, the story focuses on topics related to growing pains like first loves, getting to know yourself, and the dynamic of friendships. Things that happen to the main character mature them and assist in their growth. Even though the films I just mentioned earlier were released in the 1930s, the concept of coming-of-age movies was cemented in 1955 with this little tiny film that you may know called Rebel Without a Cause. The genre only grew from this point during the 1960s, with coming-of-age films focusing on tween age, and it grew even bigger in the 1980s with a focus on high school teenagers. Even though this genre rapidly expanded, one subset of this subset genre was getting left behind. That one genre was Black coming-of-age films. One of the earliest and most recognized coming-of-age Black films is The Learning Tree. Based on Gordon Parks' 1953 semi-autobiographical novel and released in 1969, The Learning Tree follows a character named Newt who experiences almost every trauma imaginable. From his girlfriend getting R-worded and impregnated by a white man, and him witnessing a brutal murder, this entire film is steeped in trauma. The same can be said for other early Black coming-of-age films like Black Girl, which premiered in 1972 and focused on generational trauma and dysfunctional family dynamics, and also the film Cornbread, Earl and Me, which was released in 1975, and it focuses on police brutality and intimidation. Even though some of these films highlight the unique perspective and issues that we as Black people have to deal with within our lifetime, I've always been a big believer in balance. Not only are these movies essential, but so are films that people can use as a form of escapism. When I sat on this idea, I started listing every coming-of-age Black film that I considered care and trauma-free when it specifically relates to the Black experience. After hours of thinking about it, I narrowed it down to movies like Dope, Roll Bounce, The Inkwell, Crooklyn, Love Don't Cost a Thing, House Party, The Wood, and lastly, Akeelah and the Bee. I knew this list was long, so I wanted to narrow it down even more for this video. I excluded any movie that involved dealing drugs, so Dope had to go. I then excluded any movie where the character wasn't just living their everyday life like an average teenager, so there goes Akeelah and the Bee. Within the movies left, I knew I couldn't watch Love Don't Cost a Thing again. I mean, hell, I have a 21-minute video on my channel analyzing it. Please check it out. It's my first video ever. Thank you. When I started to watch Roll Bounce, Crooklyn, House Party, The Inkwell, and The Wood, it was clear to see which movies were the least traumatic and common to me. I can see a teenager's entire goal for the night is just to have fun and throw a memorable house party, and I can also see teenagers trying to win a skate off during their summer break. Don't get me wrong, The Wood has many moments of realism, but remember my goal was to choose the movie with the least amount of trauma. Being in a store where a robbery is taking place and also police harassment is a form of trauma to me. Also, I think that tone matters. Even though The Wood is a comedy, the scene where they are harassed by the police feels more serious and intense than not. They had just come from a robbery and the police were seconds away from finding the gun in their car. I originally included Crooklyn in this video, but as I continued to do more research, I decided that Crooklyn deserved a video on its own. After watching those selected movies for like the 5th time, I realized that having a full Carefree movie for Black people and their experiences might be entirely impossible. Even with the 3 that I narrowed it down to, there are still some sort of Black trauma or issues embedded within these films. The discussion of escapism versus reality has become a hot topic within the last few years. Even though I personally enjoy a little bit of escapism in the things that I watch, hell, Brandy's Cinderella is one of my favorite childhood films. Escapism can be a slippery slope when it comes to Black characters, shows, and movies. When it comes to House Party, the majority of the movie, in my opinion, is an accurate depiction of a teenager's life. The main goal for the protagonists, Christopher, aka Kid, and Peter, aka Play, was to throw a party and to meet some girls. That's it, and that's all. Highlighting the ever-growing rise of hip-hop culture, rap battles, and dance-off made this movie become a classic. It's fun, full of laughs, and has an amazing soundtrack. Even though throughout the whole movie, it's hard to take any scene seriously, from the overly grown bullies to pouring a full bag of sugar into the Kool-Aid, this movie took a light approach to every plot point. The whole purpose and tone of this movie was meant to be a form of escapism, but even then, truths about the Black experience still seep through. One example that stood out to me was the constant harassment from the police. When the bullies chase Kid through a party, they are first stopped by police and then humiliated by the cops, who force them to repeat weak-ass affirmations. Kid's father also has a run-in with the police while he's just walking down the street. He is harassed for a while before they let him go. I know that as Black people we have a complex history with law enforcement, and it is something that we have to consider pretty much every day of our lives. But I also think just because we experience it doesn't mean we need to see it all the time. Those scenes in House Party feel very unnecessary because not only do they not add to the plot, but it also wasn't funny to me. We don't have to see it in order for it to be true. In Roll Bounce, they do a good job at excluding most things that we as Black people have to deal with. I think this quote from a Robert Ebert review sums the movie up perfectly. Roll Bounce does a good job of doing exactly what it intends, showing a summer of the lives of ordinary teenagers and their parents, and remembering the roller disco craze that preceded hip-hop. It's based on fact. Chicago Black kids in the 1970s really did move between a neighborhood rink and a ritzier North Side rink, and it was kind of a territorial thing. Even though I think this quote was for the most part accurate, I want to dig a little bit deeper and focus on the ways the negative aspects of the Black experience will always seep through. The memorable moment that happened was after Xavier and his friends left Sweetwater. He says everyone thinks they're just ghetto boys from the South, but it's clear that people's perception are based on their race and not their actual class. When he is delivering newspaper, it seems that he lives in a middle-class neighborhood along with his friends. Facing prejudice is something that is part of the Black experience. Even when the Sweetwater Rollers started talking to Xavier and his friends, every insult dealt with race and the stereotypes associated with Black people.
Roy, check him out. I'm checking. Wearing them hand-me-down skates. I mean, come on, who y'all supposed to be? The food stamp crew?
No, man. These are the welfare rollers.
Maybe because I'm not from Chicago, but his neighborhood didn't look that hood or ghetto to me. Even when I thought about it some more, I remember Michelle Obama growing up in the south side of Chicago, and she explained how it was very different now than how it used to be in the 70s and 80s. But hey, I could be wrong. When it comes to the Inkwell, I find that the way they inserted Black issues was very unique. Throughout the movie, the protagonist Drew never had to deal with any racial issues or stereotypes when it relates to the plot. Of course, this makes sense because the film takes place in Martha's Vineyard, which is known as an affluent island off the coast of Massachusetts with a predominantly Black population. The only time that racial issues were discussed was when his father Kenny and Drew's aunt husband Spencer would have arguments about their opposing views. What I find weird about this storyline decision was that I felt like it didn't have much correlation to the overall plot. Kenny being an ex-Black Panther and Spencer being a Republican have nothing to do with the main plot whatsoever. As a moviegoer, I just wanted to watch Drew have a fun-filled summer where he grows and learns more about himself by the end. Sometimes I can't stand when this happens in movies, and I call this the Spike Lee effect. It's always clear that the director inserts their opinions just to insert them. Unless it's embedded within the plot, I don't always think it's the best decision when it comes to story structure. The Inkwell does this, and I honestly feel like if they didn't insert their opposing arguments between Kenny and Spencer, the entire movie would have fallen into the escapism category. Before I continue on with the video, I just want to give a shout out to my non-existent sponsor, Yoo-Hoo.
And if I ain't got some Yoo-Hoo left, you're gonna see a snake playing the bongos before you go to that skating rink again.
Another name for action is Yoo-Hoo. Yoo-Hoo. Yoo-Hoo chocolate action drink.
Yoo-Hoo means action and cool refreshment. Yoo-Hoo's got a super chocolate taste, rich chocolatey chocolate, and it's made with 99% fat-free milk. And Yoo-Hoo's not carbonated. Instead of filling you up, Yoo-Hoo keeps your action up.
Another name for action is Yoo-Hoo chocolate action drink.
From Iroquois Brands.
Yoo-Hoo chocolate drink is a delicious soft drink value because it's made with
99% fat-free milk.
You'll love Yoo-Hoo.
It's moo delicious.
Because black characters and tropes are barely subverted in black media, I wasn't surprised that House Party fell into the same tropes and highlight the same issues that have been established throughout the decades of cinema. The most obvious issue is colorism. Kid, the lighter complexion male character, is seen as the sweet and inexperienced one. He isn't as pushy as Play, and he doesn't try to get as many women as he can. Play, on the other hand, is hanging out and kissing a girl for the first half of the movie, and by the end, he's receiving kisses from a completely different girl, Shireen. Where the stereotypes and colorism become even more blatant is when it comes to the characters of Shireen and Sydney. The darker-skinned character Shireen is the only main character who lives in the projects. People are in and out of her house, and they refer to Kool-Aid by the color and not by the flavor. An article written by Anika Jones titled Representation Matters explained the characters perfectly. Shireen is characterized as a Jezebel. Shireen is not afraid of sexual conversations, as she initiates them with her best friend on several occasions, even at inappropriate times. When they are sitting outside of her house, she makes fun of her best friend for being a virgin. She constantly flirts with the boys in the film and brings up sex to her best friend quite often. When you see Shireen, she is dressed in outfits that are tight, short, and revealing. The only time she is not seen in clothing like this is in her last outfit, in which she is wearing pajamas. When it comes to conversations with Sydney, Shireen jokes around when the conversation becomes more serious. She tries to stay on the light side of conversations. Her humor can be inappropriate at times, like when she makes a joke to Sydney at the party. Her role in this film is as a supportive friend for Sydney when she needs it, or to be Sydney's competition for Kid. This would categorize her as not only a Jezebel, but as a sassy black best friend as well. Throughout the movie, they alluded that Shireen is easier because she is a quote-unquote project girl.
Besides that, with a father like you got, you can't be dealing with no project girl.
Sydney's character is supposed to be the goody two-shoes who is clearly the wealthiest of the group. Even though every person around her considers her the good one, she actually isn't. She sneaks Kid into her room and they both attempt to get intimate with each other. In that same essay, it goes on to say, Sydney is not fetishized in this film. Her appearance is commented on in the film and in the first scene like Shireen's. However, this does not continue throughout the film. When Kid does mention wanting to sleep with Sydney, she does not exist to only be drooled at. The males do not talk much about Sydney at all, and when they do, this is only one instance in which she is mentioned in a sexual way. This is a conversation with Kid and Play at the house party, where Play suggests to Kid that Sydney is a better match for him. Kid is the only male character who mentions wanting to sleep with her. Sydney is also not put through multiple situations with multiple guys that can be sexually suggestive. Sydney was not constantly objectified like Shireen was. Shireen is painted as a tease, making the male characters quote-unquote beg for it. This film follows the stereotype of women with lighter skin being more innocent in nature and darker skinned women being promiscuous. Even the term good hair was a way they described Sydney's appearance in the film. In Role Bounce, there was little to no black character archetypes. The only time that black issues arose was when the clown of the group, Junior, was joning on his friends. Most of the jokes revolved around colorism, texturism, and featureism, which I'm sure was way more common during that time. Even though most of these things were said in a joking manner, now it's hard to ignore those jokes because now these topics are more discussed in black spaces. Now let's get to the most glaring issue with the Inkwell. Drew and Heather's relationship should have remained platonic. I've noticed that within the last few years, and especially after the whole Boosie paid a prostitute to take his 13-year-old son's virginity.
Training them boys, right? Ask in there, my nephew. Ask in them, ask my son. Yeah, they were 12, 13, they got hit.
When I watched the movie for the first time, I've never expected for Drew and Heather to have their moment on the beach. I'm still not 100% sure if they had sex, but I feel like it's heavily implied. Throughout the whole movie, they show Drew and Heather's bond grow deeper. What I was expecting was a temporary friendship between the two. The most I thought would happen was maybe a kiss. It was so alarming to me that the moment they shared on the beach was supposed to be depicted as a positive thing. When it even relates to the plot line, what was the point? If Drew got his first heartbreak, made new friends, and finally had someone to talk to about his feelings, isn't that enough to show his growth? It feels like this plotline with Heather is just a way for Drew to have someone to sleep with at the end so he could have that quote-unquote rite of passage. Drew's character could have easily lost his virginity to Lauren, so when she went back to her ex and stood him up, it would hurt even more. I think this is clearly a glaring issue within our community that I'm glad is being discussed now, because I truly believe if the roles were reversed, their quote-unquote moment would have been perceived completely different. One thing I noticed while watching these movies was a lack of a traditional family foundation. In House Party, Kid was raised by his father, who he called Pops. He was shown to be caring and concerned about Kid's grades and goals for the future. Even when Pops put Kid on punishment and Kid still left the house for the party, he went searching for him. He was clearly an active parent who only wanted the best for Kid. I'm assuming Kid's mother passed away, but what I found the most interesting was how Play's parents never appeared in the movie. They were off on vacation and their presence was never felt. Play barely discussed them, which only created more mysteriousness about his home life. In Roll Bounce, Xavier's father Curtis is shown in a similar light as Kid's father. He teaches him responsibility and respect for his household rules. The only downside was that Curtis wasn't very supportive of Xavier's skating. He feels like Xavier could be doing something better or more productive and doesn't hold back in letting him know how he feels. By the end of the film, Curtis confesses that he doesn't understand why Xavier loves roller skating, but he does support him in his hobbies. Even with the other movies that I thought of including in this video, like ATL and The Wood, a traditional family foundation was missing in both. When it comes to the family foundation, I do like how Roll Bounce and House Party subverted the stereotypical role of the mother being the only active parent. I did find it interesting though how the mothers passed away as opposed to just being absent. To me, that's saying that a mom being absent by choice is not something that happens in the Black community. They're only absent because of their passing, which I think is such an interesting topic. The Inkwell showed a different family dynamic compared to both Roll Bounce and House Party. Drew and his cousin Junior had both parents in the household. When it comes to Drew's parents throughout the whole movie, it was clear that Kenny was often still stuck in the past, and Brenda felt like this stifled their family.
Those tired parolees you call friends, I know what this is about, Mr. Kenny Tate. It's about a 16-year-old boy you don't know how to talk to, and a dashiki you're afraid to take off.
Their marriage seemed like it was on the rocks until Kenny was able to see that his lack of growth was affecting his family. Even though I think the parents' storyline wasn't needed at all for Drew's story to be great, I can say that I like the approach they took when it comes to showing two caring and active Black parents trying their best to raise their son. That's also one thing I noticed that these three movies have in common. They all have fathers actively participating in raising their son, which subverts the stereotype that the majority of Black families have absent fathers. One thing that tied these three movies together was that their classism was similar. In Roll Bounce, House Party, and The Inkwell, they didn't have any financial constraints. They were middle-class teenagers attempting to enjoy the freedom that youth provides. This is my favorite part about these films. Xavier's father is an aerospace engineer who is struggling to find work. He then finds a job working as a custodian, and Xavier soon finds out about their financial troubles. I do want to say that I'm not an engineer, so I don't fully know, but I can't imagine that he'll soon find a job in this career because, he's an engineer. Even though he sold his car, their money troubles feel only temporary compared to other films where their financial constraints felt more permanent and generational. In most of the other coming-of-age films like ATL, Boys in the Hood, and Juice, their lack of financial freedom is more constricted. In ATL, both Rashad and Ant work with their uncle while still attending high school, and in Juice, the group of friends think that by robbing a store, they'll be able to fund their way out of the hood. They are born into poverty and they're trying to figure out a way out of their circumstances. Removing financial constraints from these characters help them to be able to focus on more carefree things like parties and winning a skate-off. What I find the most interesting is that in most carefree, coming-of-age Black films, even though financial issues exist, they feel almost temporary compared to the more serious teen movies. House Party was the only one out of the three that didn't touch on financial issues. In Xavier's case, his family's financial constraints didn't directly affect him in any way. He didn't go without food, his livelihood wasn't threatened, and he was able to pay for things like entering the skating rink, money for the bus, and food. In The Inkwell, having Drew's story take place in one of the richest Black towns in the US made the story and the setting feel fresh and new. I can only think of a few Black movies that take place in Martha's Vineyard, so I usually love seeing it. At the beginning of the movie, we see where Drew lives, and it's unclear where the family financially stands. I'm pretty sure they're middle or lower middle class, but they don't seem without. His mom Brenda clearly comes from money because her mom and sister both reside in Martha's Vineyard. The financial placements that the adults are in doesn't affect Drew's story whatsoever. With the Inkwell, I feel like the protagonist's story was so far removed from his parents' story that if they had financial issues, it wouldn't affect him or his story. Doing this did help in creating a form of escapism in Drew's life. He never dealt with any issues pertaining to his race or his family's finances. Escapism is supposed to be exactly what the word is saying, help us escape. What I've noticed is that if a movie attempts to recreate the Black experience, full escapism feels entirely impossible. Even with movies like Black Panther, which a lot of people believe is a perfect example to represent Black escapism, I do think moments from our Black reality seep through. I mean, both the protagonist and antagonist had fair points about our community. One wanted to help all the Black people around the world, while the other knew that exposing Wakanda would soon lead to colonization and eventually racism. Even with the rise of Afrofuturism and Afrofantasy, I somehow always find moments of the traumatic elements of the Black experience within these movies. I can say that I do think for these types of films that I just discussed in the video, it can be hard to notice for people who watch these movies casually. But for someone like me who has a hard time not dissecting everything about a movie, I somehow always notice these topics hitting well within Black movies. I also want to note that there is a huge lack of Black coming-of-age stories focusing on a girl that just shows her having fun and learning life lessons. The only one that comes to mind right now is Crooklyn. I want to close this video by saying that I still love these movies and I will always be a fan, but I would love to hear how you feel in the comments. I have every link to the articles that I mentioned in this video placed below in the description. As usual, I just want to say thank you for watching. Bye!
Dancing, dancing, dancing.